Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Kamma Nun Bays, Bava Kamma 52. We're going to start on an aleph from a base, 4 lines from the bottom. Today's Daf Yomi is dedicated for Shmira, for all of Am Yisrael, Atzala, and Geula, for the Shavuyim. So we're going to start 4 lines from the bottom on an aleph from a base. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amocher Bor, Lechavero, somebody who sells a well to his friend, Kivin Shemasar or Delayo, once he gives him his cover to the well, Kana, the person who he gave it to, has acquired it. Mara says, what are we talking about? Heichi Dami, what's the scenario that we're talking about here? Ibekaspa, if the person is trying to acquire it with money, with Nebekaspa, let him just acquire with money. Why does he need to give him the cover? And Ibechazaka, and if he's trying to acquire with a proprietary act, with Nebechazaka, then let him acquire with his proprietary act. So Gemara says, no, really he's trying to acquire with a proprietary act on the well. But even though he's acquiring with a proprietary act, he still has to say to him, go and acquire it. It's not just enough to do a proprietary act. You have to say, go and acquire it. But once he gives him the cover, it's like he said to him, go and acquire it. Says the Gemara, somebody who sells a house to his friend, on top of Num, once he sells a house to his friend, once he gave him the keys, then he's going to say he's acquired it. The Gemara, once he gives him the keys, he's acquired the house. And the Gemara says, again, how is this possible? If it's with money, let him buy with money. If you're saying he requires a proprietary act here, let him do the chazaka. So the Gemara says, no, it's with the proprietary act. But even though he's doing a proprietary act on the house, he still has to say to him, go and acquire it. And keep a shamasar maftech. Once he gave him the key, it's commander amarlay. It's as though he said to him, it's as though he said to him, go and acquire it. Amar Shlakish Mishum Rabbi Yanai. It says Rish Lakish, the name of Rabbi Yanai. Amochar Eder Lechavero, somebody who sells a flock to his friend. Kilin Shemasaro Mashkukis. Once he gave him the Mashkukis, we'll see what that is. The Gemara is going to explain what it is. Kana. He's acquired it. The Gemara says, well, what's this going on here? Ibn Mashicha. If you're acquiring this flock by causing the animal to go to a certain place, by hitting it, then like maybe Mashicha, then acquire through the Mashicha. Even Masira, if you're acquiring the animal by holding the bridle, the reins, then if that's the case, like maybe Masira, acquire through the Masira. So Gemara said, no, all the Mashicha. He acquires it through the Mashicha. Way, but still, even though he's acquiring through the Mashicha, he still has to say Lech Mashach L'Kanei. He still has to say that expression. Like even the Matzah or Mashkuchas, once he gave him this Mashkuchas, command Amrei Lech Mashach L'Kanei. It's as though he said to him, go and acquire it. What is this Mashkuchas? Here in Babylon, they said it's a karkashta. It's a bell that you ring, and the whole flock comes after you. Whereas Rabbi Yaakov says, Iza the Azla Bereish Adra. It's a goat that walks at the head of the flock. Darshahu Galila, like there was a certain Galilean who expounded upon this, and he expounded on it Alei de Rav Chisda, in front of Rav Chisda. He says, Kan Ragiz Raya Halana Avid Lenegda Samuta. And he says, when the shepherd gets angry at his flock, he makes the leader blind. And Rashi says that that's a reference to when Hashem Yisparach wants to punish the Jewish people, he appoints for them leaders that aren't good. And so that's what this is a reference to. He's also thinking that this could be a polemic against Jesus because it says a certain Galilean. Who is that Galilean? Maybe it's a reference to Jesus. He was from Galilee. And the Gemara is saying that when Hashem wants to appoint wants to punish the Jewish people, he gives a bad leader, somebody who leads them astray. It's like Jesus who led the Jewish people astray. So the Mishnah says, Tiso Arishon, let's say the first person covers the pit, covers it, and the second person comes along and finds it uncovered. Below kiso, and he doesn't cover it up. Hasheni chayv, and the second one is the one who's responsible. Kiso karoi, let's say the first guy covered it properly. V'nafo socho shoro chamor, an ox or donkey fell into it, mace, and then he died, potter. Then we're going to say that the person Kiso karoi v'nafo socho shor chamor. Let's say he covered it properly, and an ox or donkey fell into it, and he dies. Then we're going to say he's exempt. Lo kiso karoi. Let's say he didn't cover it properly. V'nafo socho shor chamor, and then the ox or the donkey fell into it. So then, under those circumstances, umeis and he dies. We're going to say he's chayiv, he's liable. We're in the nun beis amid aleph in the middle of the Mishnah. Nafo a fun of Mikola Kriya. Let's say the ox fell into the pit. We'll see what this means from the sound of the digging. Chayev, we're going to say that the owner is responsible, the owner of the pit. But Achra, we fell backwards, Mikola Kriya, from the sound of the digging, Potter is exempt. Again, the Gemara is going to have to explain what these cases mean. Nafo Soko Shor V'Kelev. Let's say his ox and his utensils fell into the pit, finished stabru, and they broke. Chamor v'kelev, or the donkey and its utensils, the niskaro, and then they tore. Chayav al behema upater al kelam. He's going to be responsible for the. He's going to be responsible for the animal, and he's exempt for the utensils. Nafo socho shor chera shota v'katan. Let's say an ox which was a chera shota v'katan fell into it. Then we're going to say under these circumstances he's liable. Ben obas eved oama, let's say a son or a daughter or a slave fell into it, then we're going to say he's exempt. So we'll see what these cases are referring to. The Gemara is going to go into all these cases. So first of all, we said in the first case of the mission that the first person covered it, and then the second guy found it uncovered and he didn't cover it, only the second partner is liable. But Varishon at Amos Miftar, you mean to say if it's uncovered forever, until how long is the first person's exemption, immunity from liability apply? So Amarav B'chtei Yeda. So Rav says, we'll see what Rashi says. What does it mean here? It means until he finds out about it, until he comes back and sees it uncovered. Once he sees it uncovered, then the fault, the liability goes to both of them. And Shmuel says, no, he doesn't have to go there and see it. As long as they tell him about it, and as long as they tell him that it's uncovered, that's enough to say that he has the shared liability. And Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan says, no, it's the time it takes for them to tell him, but then he has to be able to hire workers to cover it, to remediate. Says our Mishnah, Kiso karoi, let's say it was covered properly, if it was covered properly, and an ox or donkey fell into it and died, he's going to be exempt. So says the Gemara, well, I don't understand this, asks the Gemara. Given the Kiso karoi, if it's covered properly, then how would it possibly, how can the ox or the donkey have fallen in if it was really covered properly? So now we're talking about a case where even though he covered it, the worms got to it from the inside and it disintegrated. So there's no way he didn't know. He covered it properly, but the worms got to it and therefore it disintegrated. So the Gemara asked the question, well, now we have the following scenario. Asks the Gemara, let's say he covered it in a way that it could withstand the challenge of oxen, but it can't withstand the challenge of camels. Meaning to say he covered it properly for oxen, but not for camels. And then the camels came, and the camels came and they ruined it. So he covered it properly. So he covered it properly for oxen, but not for camels. But the camels came and they ruined it, and now the oxen came and they fell into it. So what would be the law? So Amri Heichidami, what's the scenario that you're asking about? If there are camels there and he didn't cover properly for camels. Poshea, who is obviously negligent, the camels ruined it, but that he was negligent. But if there were no camels there, Anusu, then he obviously was total accident. It's not his fault. Well, tzricha the asul aprakim. We're talking about a case where there's sometimes camels there. Me, I'm reading keeping the asul aprakim. We say that since sometimes the camels come, posheahu, we're going to say he's negligent. Because he should have realized that sometimes the camels come. Or perhaps we say keeping the hashta. Since right now, mias leika. Since right now there's no camels. Anusu. Since right now what happened was it wasn't the camel that fell in, but the oxen. So therefore, it's an accident. It's not his fault. So let's try to answer this question. Tashma, let's try to answer the question from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says, Kisol Karai, if he covers it properly, even Nafal Socho Shor Chamor, and an ox or donkey fell in, Umeis, and the ox or donkey dies, Potter, he's going to be exempt. So what's this case that our Mishnah is referring to? If you want to say he covered it properly for both oxen and donkey and camels, well, Nafal. Then how could it have fallen in? So it must be that we're talking about Elav Karai, which Varim below Karai was Moam. It must be that we're talking about a case where it was appropriate for oxen, but not for camels. If we're going to say that the camels are common there, why would it be exempt? Poshehu, he was negligent. And if the camels are not common there, Pshita, it's obviously the case that under those circumstances, that he's not responsible. Onusu, it's a total accident. So it must be Elav, the Asil Prakim, the Asil Gmalim. So Elav, the Asil Prakim, so that sometimes camels come. The Asil Gmalim, and the camels showed up. Varua, and they ruined it. Asu Shvarim, and then the oxen came, and Nafubei, and they fell in. Vikatani Pater, and we say in this case that we're exempt. Alma, so we see from here, keeping the Hasha, since at this moment that what came in was not the camel, Leka Onusu. Therefore, they're keeping the hashaleka anosu. So Tosfos asked the question: why don't we say that this is a concept that we said earlier in the Talmud? That if you start out with negligence, in the end it's ones, and the end it's an accident, we still hold you liable. Why doesn't this fit into that category? And so there a lot of the Rishonim deal with this question. But a lot of the Rishonim deal with this question, and you see why there's a very, 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 very long Tosfos on this page and talks about it, but this doesn't fit into that category exactly. Some answers are it has to be directly on the item that it was done. You would have had to have been negligent with the ox and then an accident on the ox in order for it to be liable. That's one of the classic answers. But anyway, we should just be aware of why this doesn't fit into that category. He was not negligent with respect to camels are sometimes common there, but in the end, he was negligent with respect to the camels, but he was not negligent with respect to the ox because the camels are not common. That's what they're saying. So the Gemara says, no, that's not actually the answer. No, we're not going to say that answer. We're going to say he covered it properly with the kakashu, and that's the reason why he's exempt. The kakashu achechinafel. And how did it fall? It fell because it disintegrated. And so that's why it fell, because it was it just disintegrated on its own. So again, we're trying to answer this question. So we try from the next clause in the Mishnah. Tashma Loki so if he didn't cover it properly, and the ox or the donkey fell into it, Umeis, and the animal died, Chayev, he's going to be responsible. And Gemara says, now, hey, Chidami, what's the case? If he didn't cover it properly for either animal, Pshita, it's obvious. Would you even need to say the Chayev, he didn't cover it? So it must be that he covered it properly for oxen, but not for camels. Well, if that would be the case, Pshita Tzricha Meimer Dechayev. If he didn't cover it properly for camels, of course he's responsible. Alav Karoi L'Shvarim Ul Karoi L'Gmolim. So it must be that he covered it properly for oxen, but not for camels. Now, Hey Chidami. So what's the case that we're talking about? If it was camels there that were common posheo, it's obvious he's negligent. If there are no camels, it's obviously an accident. I'll have the asila prakim. So sometimes sometimes the camels come and ruin it. And the oxen came and fell in it. And we still say is liable. So we see from here, Alma Kivan the Atzil and Prakim, since sometimes the camel come, we're going to say he's poshe, he's negligent. So this answers your question. If sometimes the camels are there, and then this ox fell in, we're going to say he's responsible because he should have realized. And Gemara says, no, that's not what we're talking about. He covered it properly for oxen, and he didn't cover it properly for camels. And there are camels there, so he's clearly negligent. Do you say, well, it's so obvious he's negligent, why does he need to say it? My answer is, yeah, there's no chiddush, there's nothing new being taught here. It's just that since the first clause of the Mishnah talks about a case where it was covered properly, the second case of the Mishnah talks about a case where it was not covered properly. So then the Gemara says the following case. Alternatively, that's obviously not a question that we need to ask. An alternative version is this is so obvious. Given the Asila Prakim, since it's so obviously the case, Poshea, who since that case would be so obvious, he's be so obvious negligent, he should have realized that we wouldn't be asking about that. When they asked the question, this is the case we asked about. He covered it in a way that could cover for oxen and not camels. And camels are common there. And it got disintegrated. So what do we say here? Do we say since he was negligent with respect to the camels, therefore we hold him as negligent with respect to the disintegration of the cover? Or maybe we don't say this. So the Gemara says, Tashma, Kiso Karoi. So let's try and answer this question. Let's say covered it properly. And an ox or a donkey fell into it, and he died, Pater is going to be exempt. The Itmarala, and we learned about that, that it disintegrated and he's exempt. Now, what's the case? If you want to say that it was appropriate for oxen and camels, and it's still disintegrated, it's obviously it's exempt. What could he have done? So it must be that we're talking about a case, it was appropriate for oxen and not camels. And the camels were there, and it's still disintegrated, and we say he's exempt. So we see from here, we don't say so from here we say we don't say that since he was negligent with respect to camels, he was negligent with respect to the disintegration of the wood. Gemara says, no, we're not going to make that assumption. He covered it properly for camels and oxen. And yet it disintegrated. And you're saying, well, if that's the case, that's obvious. It's so obvious. What could he have done? The Gemara says, no, he might have said, he might have said, well, he should have gone and knocked on it and checked it. He should have done his service checks on it to make sure that it wasn't going to disintegrate. So, meaning to say, now obviously he's supposed to do some spot checks, engineering checks to make sure the cover is not disintegrating. But maybe he had just done it. That's what the Rimi Lenul said. He had done his standard checks. He should have done a check otherwise. So we don't say that. Tashma, so Gemara says again, we'll try and prove it. Loki saw karoi. Let's say he didn't cover it properly. V'nafla tocha, says our Mishnah. V'nafla tocha shoracham mace. And an ox or donkey falls into it and dies, he's going to be liable. Now, what's the scenario here? If you want to say it's not appropriate for oxen or camels, do you really need to say he's liable under those circumstances? It's obvious. So it must be covered for oxen and not camels. If there are camels there, it's obviously negligent. And if there are no camels, it's obviously an accident. So he covered it for camels and it got disintegrated from inside. Yeah, we say it's liable. We see from here, we say since he was a negligent with respect to a camel, it was negligent to have a poshel inyan hatla. So then we're going to say it's negligent with respect to disintegration. So Gemara says, no, we're not going to say that. Well, olam karai was shvarim, well karai was mom. So we're going to say no. It was appropriate for oxen and not for camels. Ushlichi gemolim, and the camels were common. V'asu gemolim, and then the camels came v'areu, and they ruined it. V'asu shvarim, and the oxen came v'nafu ben, and they fall in it. And the kakashuach, and your question is, well, pshita, it's obvious poshehu. So it's obvious. Why does it need to say it? Gemara says, you're right. I did the nasav reisha kisoy karai, nasav sefer nami lo kisoy. So it's just, there's no chiddush here. It's just because the first clause said it was covered properly. Also, the second clause says it was covered. It was so. Therefore, we say in the second clause a case where it was not covered. So the Gemara is going to answer this question from the following brayso: Tashma nafo socho shor chereshot v'katan. Let's say an ox of a chereshot v'katan falls into an ox that was a crazy ox, or a deaf ox, or a baby ox, or a suma, or a blind ox falls into the pit, or if it was walking at night. In all these cases, the owner of the pit is going to be liable because he should have prepared against that situation. But if it was a regular ox or is walking during the day, he's potter. Then the owner of the well is going to be exempt, because he's going to say your ox should have seen it and avoided it. V'amai, Mara says, why do we say this law? Why don't we say, since he was negligent with respect to the ox that was a cheresh, he was also negligent with respect to the ox that was not a cheresh. We see from here, we don't say this principle of we don't say this principle, since it was negligent in one area, it's going to be negligent for the other animal. So therefore, Shema Mina. So that's the Daf Nun Beis. That's this beautiful Daf. So now we'll continue. We have a few minutes, but tomorrow.